Hello and welcome to our panel discussion on offensive security. This discussion is geared to help CISOs navigate the ever-evolving landscape in this area. Our brilliant expert panel will discuss some provocative, even incendiary statements we've heard from the community over the past 6 months. Specifically, we're going to delve into 3 key assertions. First, penetration testing is dead. Red teaming is the future of cyber defense. Second, pen testing as a service, friend or foe in modern offensive security. And finally, and perhaps most provocatively, AI is upon us. Adapt your offensive security strategy or risk catastrophe. So over the course of this webinar, we're going to try and provide you with practical steps that you can take to ensure you've the right offensive security strategy in place. I'm Professor Ciaran Martin, Director of the SANS Institute CISO Network, and I have the privilege of moderating today's session with our brilliant and exciting lineup of incredibly knowledgeable speakers who are eager to share their insights and answer your questions. Let me introduce them. First, Simon Vernon. He's Head of Research and Development at SANS EMEA and one of our certified instructors. In his quarter of a century in cybersecurity, he's worked with high-profile organizations on strategic security planning, advanced threat detection, incident response, and all things cloud. He's known for helping CISOs and security teams integrate their technologies into security frameworks and for providing unparalleled insights into evolving threats. One of his proudest career achievements is having helped thousands of cybersecurity students level up their knowledge through the SANS courses he teaches. Welcome, Simon. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Jan Hutchins. He's Technical Director for Offensive Security at Secure Impact, a boutique consultancy, and has accumulated over a decade of penetration testing in notable firms. He's advised CISOs and security teams from global financial institutions to some of the largest defense organizations, helping them improve and execute their offensive security strategy. When I asked Jan about his proudest moment, he talked about his time carrying out physical security assessments or black teaming, breaking into the office of Silicon Valley tech giants. We won't be doing any of that today, but welcome to you, Jan.
Thanks, Ciaran.
Finally, but by no means least, Jean-François Maes is a red teamer who's performed high-value assessments against financial institutes as well as Fortune 500 companies. He's also the author of SANS' red teaming course and has contributed numerous tools and research to the offensive community. Some career-defining moments for him include the numerous high-value conferences he's spoken at, such as DEF CON, BrewCon, Hackfest, X33FCon, and many more. But this only scratches the surface. He's truly an expert in his field and is absolutely passionate about what he does. So I'm looking forward to a great debate. Do we agree with these statements? Do you agree with these statements? Well, let's get started. It seems more and more security teams are interested in red teaming, and sometimes, as a direct result of their general frustration with pen testing, that's what they're turning to. We know that, depending on where you go for your pen test, they can be nothing more than a commoditized tick box exercise. But is pen testing really defunct? Are we going that far? Is the trend moving towards red teaming for that value add? Or what else is happening? Jean, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely don't think that pen testing is dead at all. I think it definitely still has a place in the organization's security model. It really depends on where your organization currently is today, right? So, for example, it doesn't make a lot of sense for an organization to do a red team if they don't necessarily know what they have in terms of inventory, right? So, pen testing is a lot more cost efficient to basically start off your cybersecurity posture or your cybersecurity program, as you basically are going to be spending less money, as a pen test inherently is going to be cheaper for an organization than a red team because of expertise to actually find the vulnerabilities first. Whereas if you would go for a red team directly, right, you would basically hire very industry top experts that are trying to replicate an actual simulation of a threat actor in your organization. They might find some very low hanging fruits that a pen test might also have been found, right? But you would have to pay a lot more money for that. So I definitely think that pen testing still has a place. In fact, I think that CISOs should really work together with their technical personnel to scope out pen tests, right? And like you said, a tick box exercise probably not the best way to go, right? So really work together with your technical personnel, scope out the pen test first, and after you've done a few pen tests, maybe look into red teaming. At least that's my opinion.
Jan, pen testing, alive or dead? Does it still have a place?
I think so. It absolutely does. Not all pen tests are created equal, right? So while I can understand that there is some frustration sometimes, there are quite a few cowboys out there. We see it too quite a lot as an organization when we're hearing from CISOs. You've got to ask yourself the question, what kind of pen testing are you getting currently? You should be getting solid value from your testing. It should be manual heavy, it should be properly scoped, delivered by experts and properly contextualized so that they've got a good sort of business understanding of sort of how you operate and well-targeted reporting to actually make sure that you're catalyzing action and remediation properly. That's where the value is. When we're working with new clients and we see their pen testing history, it's often more of a glorified vulnerability scan a lot of the time. You need to be in a properly strong cadence with pen testing before sort of considering anything like red teaming. CISOs come to me and ask for red teaming when they're still getting high risk vulnerabilities in their reports, not really conducting pen tests often enough, sometimes not at all. On a very rare occasion. So pen testing is a far more effective way to assess and rule out that lower hanging fruit. My advice to CISOs considering a red team really is have you really created that right environment to get the most from your pen test? Are you actively working against your pen test team with a sort of super restrictive scope or ticking regulatory boxes, providing incomplete information? Or do you have a more realistic overview? We've got a maturity model that we like to sort of pass out to a lot of CISOs. We often share that. Hopefully point senior stakeholders to help them understand where their organization truly is at. I'll see if I can get that linked in.
Thank you very much, Jan. Simon, there's a consensus emerging. Are you going to go with it or are you going to smash it?
Oh no, and without trying to parrot exactly what Jean-François said, there is a process that organizations really have to follow, and red team is the last one in that process. There's no point having a red team if they're going to find the low-hanging fruit, the vulnerabilities that should have been patched. So it's a process and it's a journey that organizations have to go on. They start with asset inventory, knowing what you have and whether or not it's communicating using proper encryption methods, whether data is encrypted in transit and at rest. Then you go on to vulnerability scanning, the automated process of identifying known vulnerabilities, poor misconfigurations, and particularly if you're in the cloud, identifying over permissive grants, etc. Those kinds of things are going to come up when you get into a pen test. And this is where the pen test becomes really important, because that's when we have then a focus on a particular kind of application or an infrastructure or a wireless network. And once you've done all of those things, you then move on to the red team, because the red team are going to find the gaps that all of those other tests and other assessments that miss. And that's the intercommunication between platforms and systems, the way that us as humans interact with IT and computer systems. That is where the red team comes into its own.
Right. So pen testing lives, but under certain conditions. It can't be just a glorified vulnerability scan and has to be adapted to the organizational environment. Great stuff. So let's move on. Even by cybersecurity industry standards, PTAS is a pretty ugly acronym, but pen testing as a service, friend or foe in modern offensive security. It's popping up more and more. It's been talked about with all these touted AI capabilities. Is it another buzz phrase, another set of buzzwords or great marketing, or is it plugging a gap that CISOs really need? I think back to you, Jan, to start us off on this one.
So I think really, while CISOs might not feel they're getting enough value sometimes from their pen testing, or maybe simply want something new, pen testing as a service, it can help augment existing security programs. But as with everything, it should not be relied on exclusively. Marketing makes it seem very highly attractive, but it's worth sort of closely comparing costs and the value of vulnerability scanning or hybridized testing like pen testing as a service, or something you can do internally versus a solid high quality cadence of pen testing that's more manual than not. You need to consider what the over reliance on pen testing as a service might produce and what automated tools can lead to. They often struggle with sort of complex or context specific issues that really do require that human interaction, that human intuition and intelligence. So CISOs really need to recognize that even if they go for these services, it should complement rather than replace manual testing efforts. Otherwise, you can get a false sense of security, which is a bit of a recipe for disaster. So friend or foe, it's a good augmentation, but certainly not a replacement.
Jean-François, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I have to agree with Jan here. One thing that I would like to stress or point out is a lot of these pen testing as a service models or marketing terms, if you will, are very reliant on automation, right? They deploy some kind of agent on your endpoint and then they will pen test your environment on demand, basically. So if you are going to do pen testing as a service, really think, hey, is this an automated service or is this something manual, right? Because like Jan said, if it's automation, we have to be really careful. Software lacks context, right? So a pen tester, the human elements, can probably find more nuanced things in the environment than whatever software might be programmed to look for, right? If the software doesn't know a specific vulnerability or a specific path to take, then obviously it's going to miss it. Whereas a person is probably not going to miss it. But obviously, if we are going to be introducing a more human element into pen testing as a service, that's going to increase the cost significantly, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And obviously, if we are taking the automated approach, we also have to make sure that the software that we are deploying on our critical systems, there's some kind of liability clause or something like that, right? Because obviously, inherently, if it's going to pen test, things might go wrong, right? And then we have a whole different world of problems. Think very recently, CrowdStrike, right? That EDR, that blue screened a lot of computers, right? It made a lot of computers crash. There's still a lot of uncertainty on where the liability is going to be here, right? So definitely take that into consideration if you want to have some kind of pen testing as a service, if you will.
Simon, I'm sorry I brought you in last again. I promise you can go first on AI catastrophe, but what do you reckon?
Oh, I don't mind. It's not a problem. I'm actually going to go one step further, and I'm into being very clear when it comes to actually defining the characteristics of a service or as a platform. And automated pen testing for me just creates fear. I don't believe it. An automated pen test service, depending on how good they are really just one step up from a vulnerability scan. They are effectively advanced vulnerability scanning. They don't contain the human element of an actual pen test. Now, when our pen testers, and I'm with two exceptional characters there this morning, who I work with very closely. It's amazing how out of the box a human pen tester can actually think and where they can take what they're expecting to see when it comes to actually pen testing infrastructure. Particularly in the cloud, then this is a huge problem inside the cloud adoption strategies, that actually implementation is, well, not as consistent as it probably should be. And so actually, when we get into the human element of pen testing, really what we're looking for is flaws in application, flaws in code, but also flaws in integration. And that is something that automated pen tests just do not have the capacity to be able to test effectively, in which case, exactly as Jan said, we then get false trust. We have this pen test report, it says everything's fine, and yet I know from an example that we had an organization who came and we did a pen test for. Once we looked at it from a human element, we found that actually there was an exposed S3 bucket, was exposed cloud storage that was misconfigured and something that an automated pen test platform is just never going to find. So as far as I'm concerned, they're advanced vulnerability scanners. That may be a bit contentious at the moment, but hey, that's my opinion.
Well, if that's what they're doing, what about bug bounties? Anybody want to come in on that? What about Jean-François?
Yeah, bug bounties. it's great. I think it's once again one of those first force multipliers, right? Like Jan said, just don't over rely on them. Also, what I would recommend for CISOs especially is make sure that you already have some vulnerability scans done, maybe some pen testing done before you actually start doing bug bounty hunting programs. The reason why is obviously because a pen test is kind of a fixed price, right? You kind of know how much you're going to pay beforehand, whereas bug bounty hunting, well, you put a price tag on the severity of the vulnerability, right? If they find it critical, it might be $5,000, might be $10,000, might be $1,000, depending on where you land as an organization. And obviously, if you haven't done any of these cybersecurity posture exercises before and you just open it up for everybody, that could actually end up being a lot more expensive than having someone like a pen tester come in first, do a pen test, remediate some of these low hanging fruits before you start relying on bug bounty hunting. Otherwise, it's probably going to end up costing the organization a lot more money than a pen test, for example.
I've got to bring Jan in here after that. What do you think?
We've had some feedback sort of from CISOs that have come back to us, and they've told us how they've entirely replaced their pen testing initiative with bug bounties. Now, whether the sort of thought behind that was good or not is another matter, but essentially they have given the feedback that it was quite confusing, it was quite disorganized, generally fairly unhelpful, a bit of a learning experience. Maybe in some instances you could use that to replace something like external pen testing, but it couldn't touch things like internal networks. You couldn't do an AD review with a bug bounty program, in my opinion. Who's going to open the gates to bug bounty hunters for internal testing? While they may come under an umbrella, they're essentially unvetted parties. So you have to make sure that you've already done a bit of due diligence, I think, before you're going to start integrating bug bounties into your sort of security model. There's also the idea of the fact that you could miss acquired knowledge that is built up with using, say, one decent tester from one firm that you know, who has done your test, year after year, quarter after quarter, whatever that cadence may be, and built that relationship and knowledge of your product. The business to business relationship is also very much lacking where you're talking about bug bounty programs. So it's very transactional, and I think you could be missing out on quite a lot if you decide to go down that way with the majority of them.
Really sage and practical and useful advice on the place of bug bounties and more generally on penetration testing as a service. Right, let us get to the crescendo, to the third and most provocative statement, to AI. It's one of the most topical subjects in cybersecurity today. We've managed to have a good discussion before we've come to AI, but of course it's going to feature in what CISOs are thinking about when they're building their maturity strategies. So, do security teams need to actively adjust their offensive security strategies to counter these AI-driven cyber threats? Or, as some would say, it's just distraction from what we really need to do and a new cycle of marketing hype. Simon, I promised you the floor. It's all yours.
This is a huge topic, and we could probably go on for at least 2 or 3 hours with this one. In fact, we've kind of done in the past. It's a double-edged sword from my perspective. There's going to be a lot of benefits to it. It cuts out a lot of the work from a low-hanging fruit perspective of identifying sort of behaviors and traits, particularly in software and logging, etc. From an offensive perspective, I think we are on the cusp of suffering some more issues when it comes to dealing with the human element and the human interaction element of people and systems. Large language models, which are what the majority of AI systems are based upon, are really very clever voice interpreters that allow you to essentially interact with a computer system using very human and natural language. And that can also be used in reverse, which means it actually becomes more of a security risk to us as well. There is also the potential for interpretation issues. So yes, the modeling is great. Yes, the technology that's out there is improving day by day, but there are still flaws in those platforms, and they are still pose quite a risk to organizations. I'll let Jean-François take on the basis that we had a discussion just recently, particularly around sort of AI models.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks, Simon. I think it's a bit early for organizations to worry about AI from an offensive perspective, at least from the aspect of, for example, like polymorphic malware or ransomware that does all kinds of evasion, all using AI. We're not quite there yet, in my opinion. It's probably something that is going to happen as time goes on, though. Like Simon already said, right? These systems are improving day by day. Language models are improving day by day. So the capabilities that offensive researchers are unlocking with these AI based models are improving as well. What I think the more immediate impact is from an AI perspective is deepfakes, right? Voice cloning technology, for example. Quite recently, actually, there was a bank heist, so to speak, using deepfakes, where a lot of millions, actually, of I think it was in Japan, currency was stolen because the threat actor was actually using AI to convince the financial regulators to approve a specific transaction. So, with that being said, I do think AI should be part of organization's threat model, but I do think that it makes sense to focus more on what really matters first, right? So the immediate threat here would be these deep fakes, these voice cloning technologies, and that is relatively easy to actually mitigate. For example, every time you have to make a financial transaction, which is a specific threshold worth of money, maybe ask for a code word, right? Very easy. Sounds super basic, right? But AI can't read minds. So if you have some kind of pre-shared secret, like a code word, like an authorization code, then AI won't know what to do, right? And AI-based deepfakes or voice clones would struggle with that and wouldn't know how to handle that. And obviously, then they would no longer be very effective.
Well, that extraordinary case in Japan, I think, has resonated far and wide. Jan, what's your takeaway on this?
Yeah, those as this technology becomes more ubiquitous and easier to get hold of. I mean, I was working with a research arm in an organisation that I worked in probably 5 years ago now that were already working on making those deep fakes for subverting things like bank sort of voice passwords, those kinds of things, and that is becoming more and more easy to get hold of. So it's not a hard requirement yet to ensure that those AI threats are included in those red teams and threat models, for example. But if you think your company or sector is susceptible to it, it's definitely best to do so. As Simon mentioned, those deep fakes and related efforts are getting more sophisticated by the day, and that as that landscape changes, and Jean-François, as Jean said, that the technology becomes, as that becomes more ubiquitous, it will become a greater threat overall. So follow those trends, adapt those internal policies accordingly, and also keep that AI governance in mind. It's not just something, as we kind of touched on, that's going to be something we're defending against, but probably something we're utilizing too. So as we incorporate more AI into our security practices, we've got to ensure that we've got transparency and accountability in how those systems are operating, making sure that we get regular audits, reviews, pen tests on AI tools, making sure that that we can sort of maintain their effectiveness and prevent new risks from emerging.
Very, very useful. Thank you. Now, as always, we can't go on for hours, but we could have, particularly on this last subject. But I think we owe it to those who are watching, for each of you as deep subject matter experts, just give us a little takeaway, a final insight on any aspect of this topic that you'd like. Jean, why don't you go first?
Thank you. I think we really have to be cautious, right? Especially with AI, both from a usage policy within the company itself, right? So I know in this panel we talked more about like the offensive side of AI, but it shouldn't come as a surprise that people inside of your organization are using AI to help with their jobs as well. Things like ChatGPT, for example. Like Simon actually said earlier, that could be a threat to the organization as well, because that data might be collected somewhere, right? So keep that in mind, right? Put those policies in place saying, hey, if you want to use AI, that's fine, but don't send any sensitive information that might leak client data or PII into those large language models. In fact, my CEO of Neuvik did a panel on this as well. I'll make sure that the link is somewhere inside of the panel description as well, where he was actually highlighting the risk of AI in organizations as well. So there you go. That's my takeaway.
Well, thank you, and very useful to have that link. So thank you for offering that. Simon, what's yours?
It's kind of again really parroting what Jean-François said. Obviously, there's a risk to data leakage from inside an organization whose employees are utilizing AI-based tools, but also AI-based tooling, particularly around voice alteration and voice synthesis, is becoming a problem when we're talking about phishing and social engineering. So again, this is something else we need to take into consideration and maybe adapt your policies around doing things like identity verification from a voice perspective, especially if you have things like service desks that issue password resets. Those are highly risky strategies now, particularly with the availability of voice synthesis. And I'll give you a really good example of this one. I was talking to a CEO a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "No, I don't believe that's even possible." So I did a short demonstration for him. I was in a flight, flew through Toronto, and so I called him from his own phone number and left him a voice message on his mobile phone from his own voice, which was all done through AI. It cost me $1.50. So these capabilities are there, and understanding the risk associated with them is really vitally important, and knowing that these technologies are getting, they're getting more powerful and they're getting easier to get your hands on.
So some cautious, technically informed pragmatism from Jean, some quite terrifying capability exposition from Simon. I'm going to challenge you, Jan. Give us a takeaway, maybe on the non-AI aspect of this this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my advice would be to take a good hard look at your organization's security maturity, and be honest with yourself. Have you got those solid foundations in place? Are you doing the basics right? What does your roadmap look like? Where do you need to be? Without that proper framework, your organization will falter at some point. We're not in a business of absolutes in security, but more risk mitigation and risk trade. So the question is to what extent? Proper manual pen testing absolutely still has a place in modern security space. As a trade and how it's implemented, we're still really in our infancy. We are kidding ourselves if we think we've done all we can. So cybersecurity is a massive battle space, and it's developing by the hour. So let's make sure that we're using the right tools in the right way to make a difference.
Brilliant. Well, I'm not going to try to summarize that. I don't think I've heard as much useful and practical cybersecurity advice in such a short time in quite a while. So let me just bring this to a close by saying a huge thank you to this expert panel, really brilliant expert panel. A huge thank you to you for joining us. And just to say, we'll be holding a number of these discussions over the next 6 months, so please look out for them on the CISO Network portal and on our socials. Indeed, feel free to suggest some. And we would love to know what you thought of today's content and discussion. So please do comment and feedback on the portal or email ciso-network@sans.org. Lastly, if you do have any follow-up questions, given the wealth of content in today's discussions, please feel free to contact the panel directly. Emails are going to be shared, and the links referenced in this panel should be accessible in the write-up below this recording. And with that, thank you very much. On behalf of the whole panel, goodbye.